Good evening, Huntington Beach. I hope everyone is doing terrific tonight. We're so excited that you've signed up to join us for the second in our series of webinars related to the city's Plan Navigation Center. A week ago, we had a chance to talk a little bit about the construction process and the history of how we got to this point in time when we're getting ready to launch the city's first navigation center. And tonight, we're joined by a distinguished panel from Mercy House. Mercy House is one of the premier, in our opinion, the premier shelter operators in all of California. With us tonight is Larry Haynes, the president CEO of the company, along with members of his team. The plan tonight is to run through the operations of the Navigation Center, provide some feedback on how Mercy House will be operating the shelter, what some of the procedures and protocols will be, and what folks can really expect to see once the shelter is up and running, moving ahead. So with that, Larry, I'll turn the floor over to you and your team. We appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Oliver. Welcome. Good evening, everybody. We are really excited to all be here. As Oliver indicated, over the next several minutes, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about what are the essential elements in terms of what we consider a successful navigation center or emergency shelter, as you might know it. We want to go over each of those. Also, we want to talk about our operations plan, some of the key components, especially as a resident of Huntington Beach, that you might want to know about. And then at the end, obviously, we will take questions and provide answers as best we can for as long as we can. Throughout the PowerPoint that we are about to show you, you will notice that there will be pictures of various locations. And what we have done is these aren't stock photos. These are photos of either shelters that we at Mercy House operate or permanent housing sites. The whole point there is to sort of give everybody a sense of the quality of housing, the quality of construction, how important the environment is, and that'll tie into some of the key points that we will want to make. So with that, if we could move on to our first slide, please. Here what you find, and we'll go quickly off of this, this is a rendering of what we anticipate the new navigation center to look like. You can see the sprung structure off to one side, which will be the area where the residents will be their sleeping quarters. Surrounding the other areas is the laundry area, administration office, and so forth. You can drive by the site now. A lot of good progress is being made, and we are anticipating, I believe, an opening sometime near the end of November, if I'm not mistaken. Things are moving along as anticipated, and so very soon we will have clients in the shelter and off the streets. We'll go on to the next slide. We'll talk about the first principle of our operations, of our organization, and of the type of program we want to run. And it all goes to an underlying philosophy of housing first. Throughout our organization, there is the underlying principle of housing first. Housing first, essentially, it's actually fairly simple and straightforward. The idea is to get people off the streets, out of shelter, and into housing as quickly as possible. Years and years ago, the strategy that most of us employed was keeping somebody for an elongated period of time in our shelters before moving them into housing. The idea was that we would fix a person first, right, before we got them in. Only then, when they were ready and perfect and everything ready to go, would we then move them into housing. And for a time, it worked. And it still works in theory, but what we have found, what data has shown, is that if we move people along more quickly, we're actually able to get more people off the streets in a more timely fashion, and critically speaking, for less money. The other issue that a housing first also approaches is that in moving people out of housing more into housing more quickly, is that we get more flow. We get more people off the streets more quickly, so people aren't trapped in shelters, that they are actually able to move on as quickly as they can. And the reason you want to do this, for lack of a better phrase, you want to get people into housing because everybody's situation is different. Everybody's situation, the things that might destabilize somebody stay in their housing or might threaten their well-being are all going to be different. And it is really impossible to overstate the importance of stability. It is literally impossible to overstate the magic that comes with housing. And so what you want to do is you want to get somebody placed into housing, the place where they will live, the place where they will call home. Then what you want to do is surround them with wraparound services, all the things, meet all the gaps, meet all the needs, of anything that might in fact threaten their stability. And you won't know what all those are, frankly, until you get someone there. Or if you try to resolve those things beforehand, you may be spending an awful lot of time and money on things that never needed to be addressed in the first place, because simply being stable was the thing that took care of the issue. So the focus that we have, not only with this shelter, but through our entire agency, is a housing first philosophy. The other thing that is important to note under a housing first philosophy, which we fully embrace, is this: housing works. Housing works, and it is for everyone. It is a human right. Having a home is what is essential to being human and to fulfilling our human potential. And it is something that isn't necessarily earned, but is something that exists simply because we are part of this country and because we are a part of this community. And so what we want to say is we are able to create housing not just for the lucky few, not for those who just sort of meet sort of our standards of, I don't know, of acceptability, but literally for everyone. These are people with severe disabilities, people who have had housing challenges in the past. What we have found is somewhere between 92 to 95% of the time, once we place someone in housing, they stay in housing. And that's why we want to focus on it. This will then go to our second point. What you will find in our shelters is a housing-centered approach. What do we mean by that? So I'm sure there will be questions, and we'll touch on some of them, but what services are you providing? Are you doing job skills? Are you providing counseling? Are you, and so forth and so on. And while all of those things are important, I have to tell you, they're secondary. And they're secondary to the concept of housing. The most important thing that we can do in any of our navigation centers is focus on housing. So what will that look like when you come to the Huntington Beach Navigation Center? Well, what should happen is anybody that you walk up to within roughly 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks of their stay, everybody there will have a housing plan. And if we're doing our jobs well, they'll have 2 or 3 housing plans. Just in case plan A doesn't work, they have plans B and C. You should be able to go up to anybody and they should be able to tell you, yes, I am a candidate for rapid rehousing. I'm going to be looking at potential housing sites in, next week. I have 3 on my schedule, etc. Another person might be able to tell you, well, I have been evaluated, I've been assessed, and I'm fortunate enough to have been accepted in a permanent supportive housing project, and I'll be moving in 2 weeks. Or another person who said, you know what, I came out here a while ago, I have family back home, all I really need is a train ticket back to Cincinnati. And that is being lined up as we speak. Every single person within the navigation center, our job is for them to have a housing plan. Everything will be housing centered. You'll walk on the property, and what you will see with all the Mercy House staff is all the signs and symbols you can imagine that communicates that they are here to address their housing needs. So, for example, what you will find is you will find people that'll have t-shirts that will say, tell me about your housing plan, lead to housing, when do you move out, whatever it might be. The whole point is to get somebody directly there. You'll find signage along the walls. We have bells in our office that ring every time someone is housed, whatever it might be. That is really what the whole focus is. That probably sounds a little obvious, right? You're like, well, yeah, of course, but it's not. It's not the organizing principle of too many other shelters that are around. And it's why when you ask me a question, and some may come later, tell me about your services, I'll answer them. But you could probably predict what I'm going to say with my second breath. I'm going to equivocate and say, yeah, that stuff's important, but let me tell you what's really important. What's really important is the meeting that they have set up with their housing navigator. What's really important, if you really want to contribute to the success and the well-being of the navigation center and the people that are there, give us leads on apartments that are for rent. Put us in touch with landlords that will accept our people. Put us in touch with landlords that will accept vouchers and rapid rehousing. Let us know what you need to overcome any obstacles. Is it double deposits? Is it triple deposits? Is it a guarantee against property damage? Let us figure this out together. But if we really want to make the Huntington Beach Navigation Center successful, all questions need to start and end with our approach to housing. Next slide. Low threshold. So the other organizing principle, the other important aspect of this shelter is that we are a low threshold navigation center. So what does that mean and why do we do it? So we will accept, we want to be able to accept the most vulnerable people possible that are living out on the streets. And there's really no getting around it. These are people that are going to sometimes have severe and persistent mental health disorders. We're going to have people that are struggling with drug addictions. We're going to have people that have got significant physical disabilities as well. We're going to have to be able to address the needs, not only the immediate needs of the person coming in off the street, but also anticipate the needs and the challenges that they're going to have in getting into housing. And that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to take in the cases of so many people for whom it would appear that there is little hope. And that is what our job is. Our job is to take the tough cases. Now, we'll be responsible. We will screen out for things such as open felonies, open warrants, things of that nature. We will screen out folks who have been sexual predators and of that nature. 209s, I believe, is the term I'm looking for. But this is a shelter that needs to take the toughest cases, bring them in, and work with them on getting housed. Whether that takes a week or whether that takes a year and a half, whatever it takes, that is our philosophy. The idea of a low threshold shelter is really very simple, and I think intuitively this will make sense. It will be to meet people exactly where they're at. The idea is to meet people where they're at, to get information from them, to create a space, create an environment where they can be honest with us, where they can be vulnerable with us, where they can be transparent about what their struggles are, exactly about what they're dealing with. And that is our job. Our job isn't to meet people where we wish they were, to allow people into the shelter to make for great photo ops, right? To cream people who are going to be easier cases. And that's why you have low threshold shelters and low housing first organizations, because for too many years, the services that we've delivered have been for people that, well, made our donors feel good, right? Or seemed to provide more assurance of success. And what has happened? Well, some people got served, but the needs of those most severe cases just went untouched, unresolved, unaddressed. And so our homeless populations continue to grow, continue to get more desperate. And that's why the national best practice has to do with all of these various topics, that we've been discussing. If we go on to the next slide, please. So here we want to talk about good neighbor, and I want to take the next 3 or 4 minutes because I think this is critical. And it's not something that a lot of us as advocates talk about, right? Over the years, what you hear is, you should support our project because it's compassionate. You should support our project because it's good. It's God's work. It's, fill in the blank, right? And what we do is we sort of set up this conversation where there's good people, and there's bad people. I don't think that's gotten us very far. I don't think that's gotten us, I don't mean to be overly political, but I don't think that's gotten us very far as a country. And I don't think it's getting us very far as a local community. Because what we really have more often than not, when we look at conflicts, right? When we look at why are folks maybe opposed to a project like this one or a permanent housing project, it's not good guys versus bad guys. Really what it is competing virtues. Really, there are good guys and there are bad guys in this conversation for the most part. It's competing virtues. So for someone to be concerned about a shelter like this coming into existence, because the concern is, what is this going to do to my business? What is this going to do to our profit margin? What is this going to do to my ability to stay open? And let's really be honest, as too many of us have lived through over these last several months, the difference between having a business that survives and a business where you have to close up shop is razor thin. the profit margins of most privately held companies, privately held businesses, is very small, is very thin. And these are local treasures. This is part of our infrastructure. This is part of our community. And for someone like myself, or any of my colleagues, or anyone else, to not take that into consideration is just inexcusable. It's immoral. The person who is concerned about turning a profit at their business is worried about feeding their family. They're worried about paying their own rent. They're worried about keeping people they care about on their payrolls. These are good things. These are virtuous things. Likewise, if you're a homeowner nearby and you are concerned about how is this going to impact, my property value, that is not a selfish thing. Although there are advocates out there who will paint you as selfish, I want you to hear from me. That is not a Mercy House perspective. We buy our homes and we maintain our homes and we take care of them, again, for virtuous reasons. We want a decent quality of life. We've worked very hard for what we have. The equity that we're building in our homes is the very thing that we'll either retire on, or in my case, borrow against so I could send my daughters to college. These aren't bad, greedy things. This is what we're supposed to do. And, to have somebody move into your neighborhood, no matter how noble the cause, to be dismissive of that, or somehow portray you as somehow lacking in compassion, is unfair. It's a virtue. Likewise, if I may, our goal at Mercy House of wanting to take people off the street, some of whom who have lived there for years, some of whom who have lived under circumstances, under conditions where it has eroded all that is human inside them, to try and bring them a sense of restoration, to try to bring them home, that's a virtue as well. And I hope that you hear that. And so it strikes us as an organization, and as someone, and I say this with a great deal of humility and a great deal of gratitude, someone who has been able to lead Mercy House for over 30 years, someone who has dedicated his entire life to this, to be able to work together to find a Venn diagram, if you will, to find common ground where all of our virtues, all of the things that we are advocating for can come together, where we can benefit each other. That's the space that we want to be. And that's what we want to do. Our good neighbor policy is not just lip service. It is not something where we just simply want to check a box on a grant application like so many others do. This has been inherent in the core and fiber of our organization for over 30 years. And the reason is that I grew up in a neighborhood where these things mattered, right? I really do get this. We really do get this. Here's what we can say after 30 years of practice. In 30 years, and there's no guarantee what tomorrow will bring. There's no guarantee what's on my phone right now. But in 30 years, what we can say is we have never adversely impacted a single business that we've ever been nearby, ever. We have never lowered anybody's property rates. We've never had anybody damage a neighbor's property. That is not what any of our projects have ever done. Are our projects perfect? No way. Are our clients, going to join the church choir sometime soon? Most of them probably won't. But will we be responsive? Absolutely yes. What we can point to is a 30-year history of being a good neighbor and valuing these sorts of things. And we are well aware that the location of this project is nearby residential areas as well as right next to businesses. We understand that, and we want to be a good neighbor. And we will look forward to meeting each of you in person. This is why we will have patrols. This is why we will have securities. That's why we'll have certain things as we discuss the management plan, because these things are absolutely critical. What I can say is we can all prosper together. We can find that common ground for all of our virtues. Before we move on to our next slide, there is one slide that it's my fault, I forgot to put in, that if we could, and this is something for us to think about, especially as city staff are listening and elected officials are listening, but it's called system. If I could have another sort of slide here, you would see a picture of a Mercy House location and the word system. And this is why. Navigation centers, emergency shelters, or whatever do not exist in a vacuum. We are only as good as the system around us. Our job is to be this middle point between outreach folks, right? There's an outreach team in Huntington Beach that will refer folks that are living on the streets of Huntington Beach into our facility. Once they are there, our job is to get them ready for housing, right? Our job is to be a quarterback or a point guard, whatever your favorite sport is, to get them ready for that next step, which is permanent housing. That permanent housing partner, maybe Mercy House, maybe another nonprofit, maybe a public entity. But the system, to be a high caliber, high quality, high functioning navigation center, is someone that exists within a system and uplifts the entire system. So what does that mean? This navigation center will be only as successful as our surrounding, as the surrounding parts. So what we need to make sure that we do, that our outreach partners are doing their job. What we need to do is lobby for housing opportunities, whether it's from the county or the state or the private sector, to allow our folks to go into so we can get flow. That is our job. The most important, the key components of any high functioning, high quality navigation center it's going to have a housing first bent. It's going to be housing centric. It's going to be low threshold. It's going to have a vigorous good neighbor policy that is more than lip service, and it's going to be a part of a system. I'd like to take a minute now, and we can go on to the next slide, where we could talk about some of the key components. I'll probably talk for another 5 minutes or so. We're a little bit ahead of schedule. I don't think anybody is going to be terribly upset if this ends a little earlier than before or more time is allowed for public engagement. But I do want to talk about our management plan and some of the key components. I also have with me staff that will help answer questions that I may not have at the ready. But one of the things that we want to talk about in terms of our management plan that really fits in, and think about the 5 qualities that I've just talked about, right? Think about that as a value system, and then use that as a filter to kind of compare what we talked about with our management plan. So the first thing that we want to make sure that we have is a bed reservation system, which means the second point that you see on your screen, I believe, that there is a no walk-up policy. So often we hear emergency shelter. Oh my goodness, what does this mean? This means there's going to be lines out, there's going to be crowds, there's going to be all sorts of havoc. This is going to be a magnet, right? It's going to be a magnet for all sorts of behavior and persons that we don't want in our area. That is exactly why we do not allow for walk-ups. That is why we have a bed reservation system, and we have a transportation plan to take people on and off the specific site. So that in fact does not happen. The reason that you want a bed reservation system like this is that, one, so you know who's going to be in your facility, right? It also provides a level of assurance and an ability to plan for the client who's staying there as well. But also what it does, and I think this is most important to the surrounding community, there's absolutely no incentive to line up. There is no incentive whatsoever to hang out. There's no incentive to come early. There's no incentive to engage in any of the magnet style behavior that can be and is, let's just be honest, is so disruptive. But that is not going to happen there. That is not what this is. We get our clients through our outreach partners they vet the folks. We have a transportation policy. Their bed is reserved. They do not walk in and walk out. That is not what this is. Tied to that, because there is oftentimes a concern, what does security look like? Who are these people? Are they dangerous? What element are they bringing to my neighborhood or my business community? This is why we have staff 24 hours a day. And yes, if there is a problem, whether it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 2 o'clock in the morning, there is someone on site that will address it. Whether at all times we have both staff and security teams there, so we can absolutely assure security for those that are staying at the shelter and anything that might surround and impact the shelter. To that point, for the very reason that I spent so much time talking about our neighborhood ethic, we have neighborhood patrols. And is it a quarter mile or a half mile radius that we patrol? Do you know what the mop says at the top of your head?
I want to say half.
Okay, we want to say half. I'm looking around me. I'm seeing some head nods. We think that's what it is. But essentially, what we have is that we have neighborhood that will patrol either a quarter or a half mile radius of the perimeter to make sure that we don't have any of our clients causing any sense of disruption or any concern for the immediate surrounding community. This is our commitment to the city, and this is our commitment to our neighbors. While another part of the management plan, while they are there, they will be surrounded with all the services, all the things that are necessary in order to move on. We will have some folks, right, who are homeless because of some bad breaks. They are ready to go to work. So we will have job training and job placement on site. We will have other folks, right, who will be have a little more of a severe circumstance, and so they will need additional help and will need to get into what we call permanent supportive housing. And so also then on site, we will have the appropriate personnel to provide that support and that placement as well. We will allow pets on site. We will provide veterinarian services. Pretty much anything you can think of that is needed, we will have on site. But, and this is the point, please keep in mind with any ideas that you have or any questions that you might have, the goal is not to have somebody there long term. The goal is to have somebody there as short as possible and move out and have the services follow them to stabilize them once they are in their permanent housing setting. With that, I think we are way ahead of schedule, but with that, I think we've given a pretty decent overview of what we would consider the key components to a highly successful navigation center. I think we have walked through some of the basics of our management plan. We have provided you, I think, pictures, visual cues in terms of what our other facilities look like to present to you, to give you a sense of what we expect, what our sense of dignity is and beauty and how important the aesthetic is for us. We have a good long time for any questions and answers from the public. I don't know that we have any. I'm seeing some head shake that we don't.
Maybe we can look at the testimonies.
Oh, sure.
Also announce that we're taking, if you can announce, type in your question.
Oh, okay, sure. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide then. We have testimonies from some of our neighbors. I won't read them to you, but we'll leave them on the screen for a time. I believe we have 3 or 4 different companies that are immediate neighbors of the facilities that we own. Don't simply take my word for it, but these are what our folks are saying. And I think it's important to know that a number of the people that you're seeing who are providing these testimonies were strongly against us moving in. They were strongly opposed. They showed up at public meetings. They showed up at council meetings and board of supervisors meetings, in tow. They showed up to public meetings at churches, very much opposed to what we were doing and voicing their concern. And we worked with them and we worked with them and we communicated and we communicated. And essentially what we asked was, give us a chance. Give us a chance to respond. Give us a chance to deliver. Let's see what happens. And time again, I think we can probably go on to the next one by now. What we found was people over and over and over and over again we became supportive. You are seeing a letter right now that is actually kind of funny. We operate a shelter in the city of Costa Mesa, our next door neighbor here, and it is 10 or 15 feet from the nearest home. It is literally right in the middle of a residential neighborhood. And man, there was serious concerns about, will this, what impact will this have on a residential neighborhood? Right across the street is a public park. This was ground zero for the city of Costa Mesa in terms of concerning homeless encounters. Well, we've been operating there now for a while. And the funny thing to that is that was always going to be a temporary location. It was always going to be a year or 2 location while a permanent location was being built. And we're probably within 3 or 4 months of moving to the new location. It has gone so well that our surrounding neighbors in Costa Mesa are actually concerned that we're leaving. They would prefer that we stay and the shelter stay because it's had such a great impact. I believe we have 1 or 2 others, if we can go ahead and put those up on. The question is that, does our performance travel? Well, in addition to being involved in Orange County, we provide services throughout Southern California. We are in San Bernardino and Riverside counties, Kern counties, Los Angeles, and Ventura County. And you can see from the testimonial above there, we have the same reaction in Ventura, even though it's far away from our you know, from our corporate office, the same level of quality, the same system of care that we have extends, frankly, no matter where we open. And I think one last time, I think we have one more to show as well. And excuse me,
Is it Oxnard?
and this is all, yeah, also in Ventura County, in the city of Oxnard, from somebody who was not supportive of us coming in at all and has completely turned around, as you can see. I believe we have a fair amount of time to address questions. I believe I'm being asked to go ahead and type them in. Can I get some coaching on
If
this?
you have questions, do type them into the chat box.
Okay.
And then, city staff will read them to us.
I need my tech savvy youth to help me through this. I have no idea what any of this stuff means. I'm just here talking to a blank screen. So hopefully I can engage someone at some point. But I will say this. We at Mercy House are extremely excited to be part of the Huntington Beach community. We believe that we are going to be able to do very good work together. We are incredibly impressed with your city staff. We have been welcomed by council. We have all of the ingredients in place to have a highly successful ongoing partnership. Our goal is to do everything we can to not simply elevate the quality of life for the people that we serve, but make no mistake, that is our job, but for the quality of life for the entire city. Our promise to you is not that we'll be perfect. Our promise to you is that we will not get everything right every single day. But our promise to you is that we will be responsive when we don't. Our promise to you is that we will have a broad community ethic that incorporates the well-being of the people we're serving and the neighborhood as a whole. I really appreciate all of your time. I appreciate the embrace that we've been given thus far. I realize this is not a singular conversation, but dialogues by nature are ongoing. And we hope to have an ongoing dialogue, no matter how many questions, no matter how long this might go. So with that, I will look to city staff. Do we have any questions in the chat box? Or
Yes, we do. We do have a first question. Where are your clients pulled from? Will they be from Huntington Beach only or from surrounding cities as well?
I'm going to turn that over to Timothy Wynn, our Chief Program Officer, to answer that. Timothy.
And so for each of our shelters, they have kind of their own different criterion for entry. Here in Huntington Beach, only homeless clients with a tie to the city of Huntington Beach will be eligible for entry. If that ever changes, we get all of our entries through a referral system. Larry mentioned our bed reservation system. And so all of our folks are vetted through our outreach partners and through law enforcement. And so they ensure that folks who are homeless on the streets meet the set criterion for eligibility for service in the shelter. And they coordinate with us to make that entry, and we'll process that entry.
In addition to that, too, it's good to know that it's our goal. It's to be a resource to law enforcement as well. So, for example, beds will be set aside for Huntington Beach police for when they find someone. So that is important. So everyone will come to us. Will have, as Timothy said, that Huntington Beach tie will be Huntington Beach specific. I feel like I am doing like 1976, a bad radio call-in show begging for listeners and so forth. Do we have any other questions? Oh, fantastic. It was going to be very lonely here.
All right, our second question is going to be, will we be able to volunteer?
Yes, we will. We desperately need volunteers. Now, obviously right now it is a little bit tricky because of the time of COVID, right? So we need to make sure that we are taking precautions. But we will have desperate need of volunteers, and we can actually post that on the city's website in terms of how to get a hold of us. It should also be, if it's not, it will be very shortly, on Mercy House's website as well on how to contact us, and that's mercyhouse.net. But we will need volunteers just off the top of my head for the following. There will be tremendous need. We will need on-site volunteers. We will need volunteers to help us engage our clients. We will need, we will always welcome organizations and churches and faith-based organizations to provide meals for us. We desperately need volunteers, and this isn't very glamorous. We desperately need volunteers to help us with our logistics, to provide constant cleaning, again, during a time of COVID, to make sure that we are having a safe and hygienic location. We will need volunteers to work with our clients. We need coaches, we need mentors, we need people that can help our housing navigators identify housing options. Anything that you can think of, that gets a person into permanent housing is what we'll need. I would ask as people want to volunteer, to keep two things in mind. Number one, while we want it to be a fulfilling experience for you, what is most important for us is that it is something that elevates and supports our clients and getting them off the streets. That's the most important thing, and that there is opportunities both on site and also to expand our imagination. There are volunteer opportunities to support the Huntington Beach Navigation Center off site. And I believe Timothy has an email address for folks.
Yes, if you have further questions about volunteering or volunteer opportunities or just ways if you have something you might want to donate or something like that, you can reach out to our Associate Development Director, Lauren Francis, at laurenf@mercyhouse.net. I'll get in contact with city staff to post that email.
And we have our next question, please.
Yes, we do. How much property can an individual bring into the navigation center when they arrive?
That's a very good question. I'll jump in to answer that one. So when we talk about property storage for folks coming into the shelter, we know that can often be one of the challenges that folks face coming in. And so we're conscious of that need, and we do provide some limited capacity for folks to store belongings. We do that in two ways. The first way is what we call an outdoor bin. So everyone gets a 64-gallon outdoor bin, and those, we drill those for locks, and we do provide a lock for folks to keep, so they do keep that secured. We do keep those bins in a secured outdoor area, kind of outside of the main body of the shelter. So folks do have to leave the body of the shelter to access the outdoor bin and return through security to go back into the shelter. The second way we provide storage is what we call underbed bins. So everyone gets 2 underbed storage bins. I believe those are, I want to say 27 gallon? Or 27-gallon containers. We also drill those to accept locks, and we do also provide locks for those. And so you do have secured underbed storage inside the shelter as well. Everything that goes into the indoor bins will have to pass through security. That way we can keep, contraband and other unwelcome items outside the body of the shelter.
Next caller, please. Sorry, I had to channel Fraser there.
What about an individual that has a drug addiction? Do you have detox services?
So these are not what they call sobering centers. Drug and alcohol use will not be allowed on site. However, having said that, a low threshold philosophy, a housing first philosophy, does not prevent somebody who has been using, to come into the shelter. That is contrary. Now, let me take a minute to explain that, because even though it's quiet in here, I could already feel the anger out there. So let me talk a little bit about what and why and what we mean by that. One of the things that you want to manage when you're addressing addiction issues is you want to address behavior, not the amount that you had to drink that night. And so what we will have are staff that will be managing the person's behavior. We will provide services and support both on-site and off-site that will support one's sobriety, that will move one towards sobriety, and that is very important to us. I want to make that very, very clear. It's not as if this doesn't matter. Actually, let me just be very plain about this so there's no misunderstanding. It is better to be sober than to be addicted. After 30 years of doing this, we've seen the destruction of what addiction can do, not only to that person, but to everyone and everything in their wake. We take issues such as employment, because I'm sure we'll get to that question, and issues of addiction very seriously. We would just respectfully ask this. If we are really serious about addressing someone's addiction and getting them clean and sober, under what premises, under what platform, under what circumstances do you think they are most likely to get sober? In a housing environment or on a park bench? The odds of someone getting clean and sober, literally living on the street, are dramatically lower than someone who is in a more stabilized position. We take sobriety so seriously, right, that we want to make sure that we are not shunning those people away. We take it so seriously, we want to make sure that we are encountering them exactly where they are so they can get exactly the help that they need. Not for them to present to us a false front of what we think they, what they think we want to see, but what really is going on. So the idea of, yes, allowing people in who have addictions, who have issues with drugs and alcohol, is not because we relax on it, not because it's not important. It is. It very much is. But we want to make sure that we do everything we can to stabilize those persons. One, so they do less harm to themselves, less harm to those around them, or to those surrounding them, and also to greatly enhance the probability of them in fact becoming sober. Next question.
All right. Our next question is, where's the Navigation Center located in San Bernardino?
The Navigation Center in
We
San
don't have
Bernardino?
a navigation center in San Marino, but we do have a variety of programs in San Marino County.
Yeah, so
Primarily in Ontario.
Yeah, so in San Bernardino County, and so it's primarily in the city of Ontario, we have an access center. We have, I think, we have shelter beds there. We have 70 some odd units of permanent housing, some permanent supportive housing, some straightforward affordable housing. We're also the operator for the city of Ontario for, I think, over 100 individuals in motels under Project Room Key. And we have a wide variety of scattered site housing units where we provide services to. In addition to that, throughout the city of Ontario, we have outreach services that cover every inch of Ontario, working hand in glove with law enforcement to make sure that everybody on the streets of Ontario is addressed. And what we have seen, it's worth noting over the years, at its peak, at its worst, once upon a time, the city of Ontario, had a homeless problem that local officials probably would have estimated to about 600 or 700, and we now have it down to about 65 to 70. So this is a system. This is a system that works.
All right, our next question. Can you expound on what a low threshold navigation center means?
Sure. I'll try and do it again. So let me try to define a low threshold system by comparing it to a non-low threshold system, because I think that maybe will tell the tale better. So once upon a time, when we first started in the 80s, when we first started providing shelter services, particular transitional housing or emergency shelter, then what we would say is, here is a high standard that would here's a standard of behavior that is required in order not to stay here, but to enter here. Right, and that's a key difference. So before, in times past, you would have behaviors. You would, for example, have had to have been clean and sober for 90 days. I'm not even making this up. You'd have had to have been clean and sober for 90 days. In one organization locally, 6 months. You had to already have a job. You had to already have money in the bank. Some required that you already had a car. Some required that the other adult that you were living with was your legally married spouse, and so on and on it went. So it set a very high threshold of people who could even get in. I'm tempted to make a bad joke about my own family members. I'm not sure half my family could have gotten into those shelters. And so what would happen is you would have fairly high functioning people that would get into our shelters and then eventually get into our housing units, and away we went. And that's fine. That's all well and good. The problem is that it wasn't addressing the majority of people that were literally living out on the streets. The problem was a ton of resources went to funding these organizations and funding these programs for people who weren't even by definition homeless, right? Yet we were spending homeless dollars on them. And so what you had was a whole sector of the homeless society, if you will, they were completely ignored because they couldn't possibly live up to those expectations. Now, that doesn't mean that when they got to a place that they couldn't have risen to it, but that's not who they were when they got there. So we flipped it. We flipped the script. In a low threshold shelter, right, we want to do everything we can to bring you in. Whereas the previous model, we would find any excuse we could to exclude you because we didn't want to have difficult cases. A low threshold model wants to say, you don't have a job, you are virtually homeless, your prospects feel hopeless, you are wrestling with addiction issues, whatever the case may be, we want to bring you in. We want to bring you in because we have seen the success of our programs, because we know that if we don't, well, a few things are going to happen. We're simply going to have more people die in the streets, right? And the issue of homelessness is never, ever, ever going to turn itself around. The other thing too is we know this. The reason that we house people that are the most vulnerable, right? The people that, we pass by Central Park or the 7-Eleven, parking lot or along the boardwalk. People that we think have no hope. It actually costs us more to walk by them and not spend $1 on their reclamation than it does just to shelter and house them right away. And the reason is that we are paying for those services, whether we know it or not, for the folks that previously weren't getting served in shelters that were non-threshold, low threshold. Well, trust me, as a society, we are paying for them. We were paying for them in elevated emergency room visits, elevated police costs, code enforcements, lowered property value, and on it went. The reason that you take folks in who are the most frequent users, the most frequent consumers of these things, is that it's actually cheaper to house them than just to simply leave them on the streets. So the reason that we create this low threshold, and so the low threshold, to try to be clear, is, and again, we are not harboring people with open felony warrants. We are not harboring people who who are sexual predators, anything of that nature. But we are bringing in people with very serious problems, and the reason is that if we don't, there's two reasons. One, from a humanitarian point of view, if we don't, they will die, and secondarily, if we can get to them and the quicker we can get to them and the quicker we can get them placed in housing, frankly, the more money we all save. And so that's why we do it. And that is what a low threshold is. It is a response to an older way of doing things, which is to set very high standards before anybody could ever get in. Final point is, before we move on to the next call, or the next question, I should say, it's not as if there are no standards of behavior once you were in the shelter. That is not what I'm suggesting. Once you are in, there are standards. You cannot adversely impact the quality of life of your neighbor. You do need to conduct yourself a certain way. You cannot be violent and disruptive and on and on and on. You do need to be working on your housing plan. There are standards once you are there. What we are suggesting is we want to create the easiest, the widest entry point possible so we can get people off the streets. Next, please.
Is someone allowed to take their dogs and cats with them to the navigation center?
We do allow for pets, for emotional support animals, as well as service animals. There are some restrictions in terms of numbers. We do ask for documentation, if I'm not mistaken, for service animals, or no, we don't. Wow, gosh, we're really liberal. But yes, we do, but it is a certain percentage. I don't know that off the top of my head. I don't know if either Yolanda or Timothy, the number of animals, what our percentage is. I want to
So
say
we do. It's limitations based on space, and so typically we see about 10% of beds have capacity for an animal, and so with 174 beds, we're probably looking around 17 animals in the shelter.
And so there is a very fine line that we are that we're trying to walk there. On the one hand, you want to eliminate obstacles as to why somebody would enter shelter in the first place. And if you do any sort of research, any sort of outreach on the street, one of the top reasons is I couldn't bring my pet, I couldn't bring my service animal, I couldn't, because historically, not only in Orange County, but throughout the country, that is not something that has been allowed. We were actually, if not the first, one of the first, I think it was either us or the Friendship Shelter, were two of the first organizations that actually allowed for pets on site and did it with some fear and trepidation. And so you want to remove obstacles. However, there does need to be some limits. There does need to be some boundary, because there's a fine line between that and creating a quality of life that is disruptive and destructive to the overall community. So but we have found that 10% number, give or take a little bit, to be about the right balance.
I think it's worth noting also that just like we have an expectation of behavior for our
Oh,
guests, we expect the animals to be well managed and safe. And we do partner with veterinarian partners to make sure that we take care of the health of the animals staying in the shelter, as well as their vaccinations, spay, neuter, and their diet.
All right, our next question. What will your clients do during the daytime? And will they be able to be free to walk around and walk through the neighborhood?
Okay, so there's several parts to that. I'll take a couple, and then you can take a couple.
Okay.
Right? So I'm gonna take the easy ones, and you take the hard ones. So that's
All
okay.
right.
The easy ones and the obvious ones, and I just want to really focus our attention as to what the point of the navigation center is. The point of the navigation center is not simply to get somebody off the streets and in some sort of shelter, but to do that and for that person to be working on their housing plan. So in theory, what a person should be doing during the day is meeting with their caseworker, meeting with their housing navigator, going to, whether it's job interviews, going to jobs, going to medical appointments, researching apartments to move into, taking care of the business necessary, needed to move into their apartments. They may need to go to whatever department to get identification, or so forth and so on. So it should be an active place. It should be the kind of place where people are doing things, if not on a daily basis, but at least on a fairly regular basis. In terms of movement, now, a lot of not a lot, but some of these answers have to be borne in mind that we are operating under an environment of COVID-19. And so some of the policies that we're establishing now might be different later on, and vice versa. So right now we are doing everything we can from a public health concern to restrict public movement as much as we can for concerns of public health. That is a fine line. That is a difficult balance. And that is because you don't want to create a set of rules, a set of laws for one part of our population that is different from another. We have to keep in mind that the people who are living there, it's not illegal to be poor. It's not illegal to be homeless. They're not breaking the law. And so, they haven't necessarily done anything that ought to restrict their liberties per se, right? That is at least the starting point in the conversation. Having said that, we're under a pandemic. Having said that, we need to be very thoughtful in how we pursue this, because we have a population that physically is going to be more frail, that physically is going to be more vulnerable, and we need to protect them. This is why we have to be so careful right now for our in-person volunteer services. Now, to get to the heart of the question, I realize it's probably not the heart of what the questioner was asking. I think, if I'm guessing right, questioner, you're asking, hey, I live nearby. Are they just going to be able to walk through my neighborhood? The short answer to that is no. This is why we have a transportation system. This is why we have a shuttle system. This is why we have shuttles that would take people in different parts of the city, different parts of the community throughout the day, parts that make sense, where they would get services, where they'd go to appointments. So no, this is not a walk-in, walk-out shelter for more than likely the very reasons that you're asking this. I will say, again, because of the pandemic that we are all struggling through, we are limiting even a lot of those shuttle services right now, just towards essential, really, truly essential services. Hopefully, as the months go by, as a vaccination is found, as we move forward as a community, people will be able to travel more. But even under the most open-ended scenario, we will not have people walking in and out of the shelter. Is there anything that I missed that should be added?
I feel like you covered it pretty well.
Sweet. All right, next question, please.
Next question. What happens when the navigation center exceeds 174 people?
I don't think that it can. It won't. There's not an ability for it to. So the short answer to that is it won't.
I mean, I think maybe you're asking like what happens when it's full and someone wants to get in. We work pretty hard with our outreach partners to plan for that kind of scenario. It's worth noting that we as part of the intake process, we try really hard to screen folks for things like diversion and to see if there are other resources we can connect them to, including our own rapid rehousing programs and other housing services in the community.
Yeah, let me riff on that a little bit because I think it's important. This is why when you heard me talk earlier about system and flow, this is why it's so important. Where you don't want our 174 people that are there, because I am sure, I am sure someone is thinking to myself, there's more than 174 people on the streets right now. And you're right. This is why it is so important that the idea isn't that you get all these people in and they just stay. This is why it's so important that we work together to find housing opportunities for these folks so they can get out, to create space for the next person to come in. So we can begin to reduce that street population, to work with people like Timothy just suggested. Hey, do you have someplace else you can go? Do you have family? Do you have somewhere else? To try and move people on so we can continue to work space. The shelters or navigation centers that are well run should never be static. It should always be dynamic. And the number of people that are in one night should always be different than the next night, than the next night, than the next night. This is the kind of thing where it should be a fluid population, not a static population. Not only if we are doing our jobs right, but if the system is performing like it's supposed to. And where the system is not, if in fact we find stagnation, then we all have to work together to fix the system to create these opportunities so people can move forward. So we don't have the exact situation that the person was asking about.
All right, our next question is, what is the average time a client will stay in this facility and with the other facilities you've worked with? What's kind of that average time before they move on to a more permanent location?
So I wish this was the question that I could answer in person so I could see body language, because I am going to sound like a politician right now. So let me just put it out there. And no offense to the elected officials. Oh my God, I just realized what I've done there. I'm going to give an answer, and you're going to go, sure. The truthful answer is really, there's two issues that drive this answer right now. There's two things. Number one, we are operating, I don't know, somewhere around 10 or 11 of these type of navigation centers, or will be by the end of the year, how we do our count. Each one itself is different. Each one itself has a different range. And the reason for that is this. So we have, and I won't name any names because I know there's competition among the cities. We operate a shelter right now that is linked to its own housing authority, right? So that housing authority can line up its vouchers, right? Can line up both its project-based vouchers and its tenant-based vouchers and rapid rehousing dollars specifically for people that are coming out of that shelter. And man, we are killing it there. We are placing people like crazy, and people are getting out fairly soon because of that alignment that exists. Well, that's a luxury that most cities don't have. Most housing authorities are going to be linked to a county, and that, I believe that is the case here in Huntington Beach as well. So what we're going to have to do, and I'm looking at Oliver off to the side, we're going to have to do some lobbying efforts, some advocacy efforts for the county to work with us, to release some of those resources, to link them into the shelter system, so we can have better outflows. This is also a policy question for city staff and elected officials to consider. You know, we have resources here in the city of Huntington Beach. Do we line up our I'm sure we will, our TBRA programs? Do we line up our CDBG and ESG dollars, or any other public source of funds, line it up for housing opportunities for people coming out of the navigation center? Do we build as best we can our own sort of system of care? So those are the things that we need to do. So I am going to answer your question, but I want to sort of provide the context that it varies, really greatly. There are other counties, for example, that we operate on. I want to be careful because you never know who's watching. That their system of care is not nearly as developed and is not nearly as sophisticated and does not have the staffing that the city of Huntington Beach has or the county of Orange. And so they're going to be a bit behind the 8 ball in terms of the numbers that go out. So those are some of the issues. A second issue that we have to consider is COVID. So we really have two sets of data. One is emerging and it's unclear, and that's the COVID data, and the one is sort of pre-COVID. So let me just start with the pre-COVID because I want to try to answer your question. I'm not evading. I promise I'm not evading, but it really is a complicated question. So within our shelters pre-COVID, the range of length of stay was roughly low 70s to about 115, right? 120 in terms of the days that were there pre-COVID. So it's somewhere in between. Pre-COVID Huntington Beach, my best guess is that's probably what we would be looking at. Here's good news and here's bad news. The bad news is that does not meet a Mercy House standard. That does not meet what our goal is. Our goal is 60 days. That's really what we would like to see. And if we were really, really to be aggressive, I have a national advocate ringing in my head saying it should be 30 days. I'm like, yeah, no kidding, dude, but please. But really what we try to do is our goal is to try to get it down to 6 days. It's hard to get it less than that because even if you move in under the perfect circumstances, you still need several weeks to find the location, get all of your documentation in order, to have your application reviewed and accepted. No matter what, there's going to be a process. So it's really hard to get it, much better than the 60 to 75 day range, although that is what we shoot for. Now, post-COVID, our numbers, I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but they are going to be significantly higher. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one, things just shut down, right? Landlords stopped taking our calls. You know, the housing projects that Mercy House built and developed ourselves were full. And so that really created a real problem for us. Just the whole, now it is starting to open back up. We are slowly turning the page, and our numbers are going to get better and better in terms of our housing. But the coronavirus really impacted our ability to do business as usual. It impacted everybody's across the entire country. The other thing too that it did was that a lot of the early numbers were so strong because these were folks that we would do an assessment that provides a vulnerability scale. These are folks that were maybe a bit easier. This was some of the low-hanging fruit. These are some of the folks that are a little bit easier to place. And so now what you're left with in a time of COVID are folks that have had more severe disabilities, more severe obstacles to overcome. So it has taken more time. But it is not uncommon for folks to move into housing in a few weeks. But we will not kick out someone who is working on their housing plan because of some artificial deadline. That doesn't make any sense. So while we've had a good number of people who have been housed within a few weeks, we've also had people that's taken 1.5 years or 2 years because of their mental illnesses, because of the opportunities that were open to them, because through no fault of their own, but because of the system. What you don't want is some bogus kind of, hey, we're running a 90-day program or we're running 180 days. Those things are meaningless. Those things don't mean anything. What you want are folks that are in your navigation center, that are in your shelter, that are working a plan. And if it takes them 40 days, awesome. If it takes them 400 days, well, then we'll be patient because we're here to end homelessness, which means we have to be here to end everybody's homelessness, even the most difficult of cases. Very long-winded answer. You're probably thinking, so what was that? What was that number again? And it is confusing. The best number that I can reflect as a pre-COVID number is somewhere between 70 and 120. It's difficult to know exactly what it's going to look like in Huntington Beach until we get started, but I would guess that we'd be somewhere in the middle there. That would be our best guess once we're able to do business as usual, and landlords are taking people in, and there is flow again through vacancies and apartments and so forth. And some of that is out of our control. I wish you were here, whoever asked that question. I'm not trying to be evasive, and I'm not trying to overwhelm you with word salad. It's just a very important but very complicated question, and I'm trying to give as much data as I possibly can. Hopefully you'll reach out to me if I have not answered your question directly.
All right, our next question. Will there be electrical outlets by the beds? And then also, someone could be concerned about their safety sleeping next to them. Are you going to put someone next to them that could potentially be dangerous or on drugs or anything like that?
Okay, so anybody who was watching the camera as you were asking the question saw me punt and look over to my chief program officer, because I honestly don't know the question as to where the outlets are in the shelter. But I will turn to Timothy, who can at least give a better answer than I can in terms of what that might look like.
So we're limited by the we're using a sprung structure for the dormitory in this shelter, and so in order to accommodate folks to be able to charge those cell phones and charge their electronic devices, we're going to be installing cell phone lockers. So there will be banks of lockers. Within each locker, there's going to be a port for folks to be able to charge their electronics, during the day, overnight. That they'll set the combos on there, so the devices will be secure. They'll be able to charge the electronics that way. If someone feels, there's a danger due to their neighbor or something like that, they should be comfortable to reach out and contact our staff, and we'll be able to move a bed or something like that, as be able to accommodate that kind of request. Safety is, obviously a number one priority for us. We do take the safety of our guests very seriously.
Also, if I could add to that, Bill, and thank you. If I could build to that, it's one of the reasons we've talked about 24/7 staff and security there for just this very thing. There's also something in the design, and it's always sort of, again, it's that whole concept of competing virtues, right? There is this concept of designing a facility where you have maximum visibility for safety reasons versus making sure that everybody has their own absolutely private, secure enclave where they could hide from everyone and everything. You kind of want to try to seek a balance there of an environment that is both has some level of privacy, but also allows for some visibility of both security and staff for safety concerns. Again, it's important to note that we are creating a dormitory style facility here for people who are moving on. This is not a permanent destination for people. Do we have, I know we have a few more minutes. Do we have any further questions?
Yes, we do. So what happens to someone who is rejected by Mercy House?
Well, I think it kind of depends on what the circumstance is. Let me just say this to that. Sounded very Nixonian. We work there is chuckling going on for those of you who can't see. We work very, very hard to not turn folks away, hence the low threshold emphasis that we spent quite a bit of time discussing tonight. If you are rejected, it is likely because you have felonies, felony warrants, I should say, active felony warrants, or more than likely, and this is more than likely, you are coming to us from outside of the approved geography, right? If we are going to deny any, more than likely, data will show that the number one reason that we would decline entry to someone is that, I'm tempted to make a joke at the expense of another surrounding community, but we might be doing work there, so I probably shouldn't. But somebody is coming from some other coastal city, into Huntington Beach, or somebody is coming from other city, and that's not what this is designed for. So in that case, number one, we would have a conversation with our outreach partner, which is to say, well, what are you doing? And two, to the person who maybe has been denied, more than likely because of geography, what we would want to do, and what our outreach partner would do, and then all joking aside, what our outreach partner would want to do is make the appropriate referral, because there are other shelters, there are other programs in other parts of the county that these folks should be accessing. We also work very, very hard to not exit people lightly. If we exit someone, it is for serious reasons. It is more than likely because they are preventing or they are creating an unsafe environment for the broader community. And, I don't know if I'm quoting John Locke or Star Trek, but, the needs of the one can't outstrip the needs of the community, right? I mean, that's not acceptable. It's a painful decision that is sometimes made to exit someone from the program, but it is only because not because we have, because we, are quick to release someone, or are looking for reasons to X someone. We consider that a failure. We consider that returning someone to homelessness is the worst statistic on our books, and we want to do everything we can to avoid that. But if we do, it's because we feel that we've been left with no other choice.
All right, next question. For someone who is homeless, where would they go to take advantage of these services?
So, would you mind? I'm going to turn to you to talk a little bit our outreach. So it's not a destination that you go to for this, but this is an engagement through our outreach partners, which are other nonprofits, local police, but with that alternative.
So our primary outreach partner for the Huntington Beach Navigation Center is going to be CityNet. So if you want access to CityNet, I don't have the phone number memorized, but we can post it in the chat. And you want to call the CityNet number, and they operate on like a phone message line process. So leave a message with your contact information, and they do very good to try to reach back to you within 24 hours.
Let me also add, in case there's any confusion on this, and it's a point that I should have made and I didn't, and I apologize for that. The services that are provided, everything that's going on at the Navigation Center, right, from housing plans to support services to whatever, is only for the people that are a part of that shelter. It is not for the broader community. This is not walk-up services for the general homeless population. This is not something that you can, the daytime services, the case management, all that is strictly for those people that are part of this community. This is not for the broader ones. This is not a destination point to come and receive services.
All right, our next question. What are some basic rules of conduct? What behaviors would result in being removed from the center?
Yolanda, you've been a real chatterbox this whole time. You feel good jumping in here, just giving us your David Letterman top 10 list here?
I exited from the program. I mean, it would have to be something really serious as a physical altercation, or if you get caught using on site, and things like, trying to bring paraphernalia in, or weapons, then those are reasons that, we would look at to exit somebody. But for the most part, we expect everyone just to be responsible and to not be disruptive. Just to work your program, work your housing plan. And, if there's anything that makes someone uncomfortable, or they feel that they're in danger, we really do hope that they're comfortable enough to come to staff so that we can go ahead and address those issues.
Yeah, I think just to add to it, thank you, Lynn. I think to add to that, in addition to that, what we really are looking for is you're there to work a housing plan. Your expectation is, if you have an appointment set up with your housing navigator, that you show up. We are hopeful that you will be respectful of yourself, that you'll be respectful of your community members, and that you'll be respectful of those that are around. We are not looking for reasons to ever exit anybody, but our expectation is the biggies are: you're working your plan, you're doing what you need to do. You're following the shuttle, the transportation system. You're not walking in and out. You're being a good neighbor to those that are surrounding us. Those are the things. We really don't end up exiting a lot of people percentage-wise over the folks that we take in. Again, we will, but we really do what we can not to. But the big expectation is, honestly, common sense. Respect yourself. Don't be a jerk to people around you, and move out, move into your own place as soon as you possibly can. Are there any other questions? Two more. All right.
At the Navigation Center, would you be able to help someone get Medi-Cal services?
Yeah, absolutely. That is part of our wraparound services. We work with FQHCs. We would work with the county departments, and yes, so that is. We would also have benefits counselors on site. We would work with anybody for any benefit that they might be entitled to, and that would be a big one. That would be one that we would be very aggressive on.
Right. And How will someone be able to contact the neighborhood patrols?
I don't believe that number has been set up yet, or has it been set up
It
yet?
hasn't yet. We haven't set up the telephone system yet on the
Right.
shelter site. And once we do, we will have a phone system, a phone number that's we'll make it public, and you'll be able to call in and get hold of staff on site at the shelter, as well as the program manager's numbers as well.
I believe, and please, someone in the room correct me if I get this wrong. I believe our target date to begin delivering services is somewhere near the end of November, if I'm not mistaken. Does that sound about right? More or less, kind of, sort of. So that phone number would probably be available more near towards the opening of the facility itself. So we simply don't have it yet. Again, not trying to be evasive. It's just a little. We literally don't have it set up yet, but it's coming.
We are. Oh, we have one more.
All right.
This is a question. Is there going to be Wi-Fi at the facility?
Yes. There will be Wi-Fi.
That was
I was
easy.
on the call the other day with our construction partner talking about wiring up and placing the access points.
And
Are we out of questions?
that is all of our questions.
All right. Well, let me just take 30 seconds for those of you at home that might be watching. Thank you for participating. I would imagine that there are some in the community that are excited about this project, and I would imagine that there are some that are very concerned. And we want to be a good steward, a responsible neighbor, and a responsible partner to everyone. And so, again, I hope that you will engage in a relationship with us, one, so we can be the best provider that we can for the city, for your prospects, for the things that are virtuous to you, for the things that are important to you, as well as so we can work together to, frankly, ending the nightmare that is homelessness for too many people living on our streets. With that, I don't know if I have a director or producer that sort of cuts the screen or what happens, but are we good?
It's a wrap.
All right. Thank you all.
I realized you were saying the city outreach workers.
Real quickly, are we off?